I, a high school student, and a couple of my other friends decided to play some D&D. I tried my hardest to be an interesting DM. I think I did pretty well. I described locations, assigned different NPCs, different speech patterns, even homebrewed some monsters and NPCs. Despite all this, in the middle of the campaign, two of my players and friends decided to pull Cards Against Humanity and start playing it. In the middle of the game. It was then and there I literally just closed the game and stopped DMing. Man, I have seen players get sidetracked and distracted, but these guys literally came prepared to be sidetracked. Hope those jokes were worth it. This story takes place over a couple of weeks to a month. And to be honest, the horrendousness of this made me afraid to GM for new people ever again. This is the cast. Me, a fairly new GM. This would be my second long-form campaign. My boyfriend, let's call him John, has been playing and GMing since the 90s. My best friend of about 8 years, let's call her Lily. She's got a few years of experience as a player. A friend I'd known for a few years as well, let's call him Roger. And Roger's girlfriend. Let's call her Mary. It'll have a deeper meaning, you'll see. She's a complete newbie and a young adult author. For starters, this horror story is centered around a Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition game. We've recently finished another Vampire the Masquerade game, which John has been GMing. He was missing being a player, which is why I decided to step up to the plate for our next adventure. I'd been reading the Chicago sourcebook and became very inspired to cook something up with the brand new lore-based material. Lily and Roger decided to tag along for the ride as players. That is where Roger asked if he could invite his new girlfriend to be part of it as well. Roger explained that she was a complete role-playing newbie who'd been following our stories from the sidelines when Roger had excitedly been sharing our war stories with her, and she was really excited to join in. He also spent a lot of time reassuring us that she would be a very good addition and easy enough to roll in, as she had a lot of experience with storytelling. She was, in fact, a published author with a handful of books under her belt. So surely, she'd be a natural talent and catch on right away. Oh, how wrong he was. A little while later, I don't remember the exact time in between events, bear with me here, we had a chat with Mary to figure out how much she knew about Vampire the Masquerade and role-playing games in general. Turns out, her knowledge was more or less non-existent. Fair enough, I thought to myself, we'd just give her a crash course. A few key links who could give her a general overview of the world, and links to the base sourcebook. We worked out what we thought would be the most fun and least confusing way of easing her into the lore-heavy world of darkness. She would play an Anarch fledgling, the child of an Anarch barbarian who'd recently been assassinated. The Carmel, world-spanning vampire organization, would show her mercy and take her in, to get access to Anarch secrets, and she would be put into a coterie with the other players. They would act as her guides to vampiric society, both in the game and out of it. Everyone agreed to this arrangement, and we were very excited to get started. I told everyone to think about their concepts while I prepared my material. While I was working out the framework of the story I wanted to tell, Mary kept in touch with me. This didn't bother me as I was prepared to hold her hand and ask questions as needed. That was when the red flags first started to show. She told me she wanted to play a character with a sort of multiple personality disorder, and she wanted them to have no less than 10 distinct alternate personalities, separate social ties and lives. She'd written notes for each of them, and she eagerly sent them to me. I didn't want to stamp out her idea entirely, but I let her know that 10 personalities was a bit much, and that I didn't think that separate personalities with separate memories and preferences was a good idea. It ran the risk of creating too much tension within the group, as the other characters wouldn't know which personalities to trust, and making decisions that some personalities might disapprove of, that would just be a mess. She saw my point and decided to dial it back to 2 personalities. They wouldn't be so much separate personalities as they were identities, with shared memories and preferences. Fair enough, I thought. That I could work with. She also wanted to write a short backstory for and about her character. At this point, we'd settled on him being from the vampire clan, the Ministry. Henceforth, her character will be known as Ministry. She sent the story to me, and it was a short story, alright. It spanned many pages of written diary entries. It was a little melodramatic, setting her character as the kidnapped victim of his sire's sadistic obsession and desire, ending with the Ministry being turned into a vampire. As it was written from her character's point of view, the drama made sense. I thought it gave a very clear picture of her character's aloof, melodramatic, and eccentric nature. At this point, she'd settled on Ministry being a luxury escort and drag queen. He had his own private identity, being a man, and then his drag escort identity, who was a woman. I had a chat with her about being careful not to start world building, at least when it came to vampiric society. Mundane stuff, she could make up as she pleased. I did want to stop her before she started making up her own lore, though. It'd be too difficult to fit into the framework of my campaign, as it was already very lore-heavy. As the story didn't have a clear ending, we decided to play it out as a small play-by-post roleplay between us. We decided on having the characters meet in the Baron's penthouse, and it would end up being an altercation and a mysterious explosion, which sent her character flying out of the window. As he was a vampire, he would of course survive the fall, and later get picked up by Roger's character. The play-by-post went fairly well, but I started to pick up on a mismatch between Mary's perspective and my own. Mary's posts gave a clear impression, between the lines, that she saw her character as having a lot more power and influence than you'd expect a fledgling to have. Playing the Baron, I definitely expected the NPC to be in control, and hold a certain dignity, even through the desire he might feel for Mary's character. As Mary didn't seem displeased with how the story was going, we finished it with no hiccups. It was not until after we finished the play-by-post, she really let me know that she was sort of disappointed by it, as she expected the Baron to be more of a sniveling lapdog who'd follow by Ministry's heels, begging for his affection. Literally what she said, but translated into English. We made a few retcons as I tried to meet Mary somewhere in the middle, allowing the Baron to remain some sort of dignant, but also catering to Mary's views on Ministry's gifts of seduction. I mean, the Baron was supposed to die in the explosion anyway, so it wouldn't end up mattering how the story went. His death was a kickoff to the mystery that the PCs were going to look into in the first act of the campaign anyway. As time was closing in for our official Session 0, I went through the folders on the Google Drive of all of our characters, and that's when I found out that Mary had already filled out a full character sheet for her character, on her own. I asked her about it, and she said that Roger had given her a few pointers. The sheet was concerning, to say the least. Let's just say that she had multiple attributes maxed out, as well as multiple skills. There were no skills in her fledgling sheet that she didn't have at least 1 or 2 dots in. Josh and I called her up to talk about it, and though she seemed disappointed that her character would be nowhere near that powerful, saying, I mean, he should feel like a real main character, we let her know that she should wait until Session 0 rolled around, and then help her fill her out properly, alongside everyone else. Before Session 0, Lily agreed to have a small play-by-post session with Mary as well, to establish a connection between their characters. I thought it was a fine idea, as it meant their characters would already know each other and we wouldn't have to spend too much time on introducing when the game got rolling. They already had the base concepts, and the BGs for their characters ready. The play-by-post session, though simple in theory, became a train wreck. Ministry, Mary's character, spent most of the time simultaneously hitting on and insulting Lily's character, and when he became desperate because of her refusal to fawn over him, this caused a scene by proposing to her in public? Lily asked Josh and I to read along because she was so confused. Was she reading this wrong or misunderstanding something? We were as confused as she was. Mary tried to explain that Ministry's actions were a cry for help, and he was trying to get Lily's character back to his place so he could tell her about the abuse he was experiencing at the hands of the Baron? Needless to say, Ministry did not succeed, and Lily's character started the game with a poor impression of Ministry. Session 0 was the first time we met Mary in person, and she seemed nice enough. I set about talking to everyone about what they wanted to get out of the campaign, and everyone helped each other flesh out their characters and fill out their sheets. For reference, John played a La Sombra, Lily played a Toreador, and Roger made a Malkavian. I don't know what any of these are, sorry if the pronunciations are off. As we all had a good time, I decided that now is as good as any day to just start playing. We could still get a few hours in after all. Each of the characters were introduced one by one, as they were called into Elysium from their havens with a handwritten letter from the Chicago Carmil's Seneschal. I know that word. When Ministry got his introduction, I was immediately alarmed, but for some reason, I decided to give Mary the benefit of the doubt, as we could fix any misunderstandings later. Ministry was personally picked up by the Seneschal, as he had spent his last days at the Prince's domain, but Ministry was now embodying his female identity, and Mary played that explicitly as a separate personality. Ministry spoke of himself as another person, separate from this female personality, even when the courtier met up with him all through meeting this vampire prince of Chicago. Ministry broke down decorum, talking over Lasombra while he was asking the prince some questions about the courtier's quest, acting overly important and telling the prince himself that he was wrong on several accounts. The rest of the session went okay, but John was especially on edge, having been talked over so much during that first half. After the first session, Lily gave Roger and Mary a ride home. Lily later told me that during the car ride, Mary and Roger had been laughing and discussing how they could backstab the rest of the party and abandon them entirely, an action that would totally derail the campaign. However, as it turns out, we would never get that far. We would never even get to the first official session. Before the next session, Roger and John decided to have some in-character conversation about what they each thought of the meeting with the prince and the Anarch addition to their coterie. Meanwhile, Lily and Mary had their own in-character conversation about Ministry's experiences under the thumb of the Baron. It very quickly became apparent that Roger's infatuation with his new girlfriend had worked its way into his character as well, as Malkavian was completely entranced by Ministry, thinking him right on all accounts, even his dispute with the prince, and calling him someone obviously made for grand destinies. Lasombra called him out on this crap, and they quickly got in an in-character argument and a lot of out-of-game frustration. I decided to step in and have a chat with Roger, asking him why his character had that impression of Ministry whom he had just met. I did tell him that it came off as a bit of a bias, but he got really defensive and accused me of attacking him. Meanwhile, Lily sent me a message asking me a question about some lore that Mary had apparently just made up, and there was apparently a lot more Anarch fledglings out there that were oppressed and needed liberating. I once again came to Mary and asked her to be careful when it came to making up lore, as what she had said was definitely not part of the story I was telling. She exploded and went into a longer rant about how I was constantly berating her and making her case, and that she never felt like we were being welcoming towards her. That caught me completely off guard. After a bit of back and forth where she both threw accusations at me and painted herself as a victim, I decided to clock out. I told her I would get back to her and put the phone down to have a good cry and vent out my frustrations to Josh. I didn't check my phone again for the next 24 hours or so, having let the group know that Josh and I had a birthday to attend the next day. It was not until we got back that Lily let us know that in our absence, she had tried to pour some water on the fire. This had only agitated Mary further, as she was sure that we had sent Lily to fix things, which according to her was a dick move? She refused to believe that Lily had gone to fix the problem out of her own volition. Turning on my phone, I found a slew of texts from Mary in which she both scolded me and the group for our treatment of her while simultaneously apologizing and making herself seem completely innocent and in good faith. That was the last straw, and I immediately following this sent a group text dismantling the campaign. I wanted nothing more to do with any of this, and promised myself a long break from GMing. Mary's response was, of course, that I was completely unreasonable and unfair, while simultaneously apologizing for upsetting me, I guess. I haven't spoken to Roger or Mary since. Last thing I heard, Roger was starting a campaign of his own, and Mary was one of the players. Oh, are those poor souls in for a treat. Some of her behavior, of course, could be excused as her being a complete newbie, and maybe I could have handled it better, but by God did that experience leave me with some DM trauma. Fun bonus info, we sent Mary a link to Geek and Sundry's LA by Night, and her reaction was that she couldn't bear to watch it, and they were horribly bad amateurs, and she would know because she knew what good amateur actors look like, as she was hired to do some film trailer for one of her books. We all dropped our jaws at this response. Also, for anyone curious, her books are cringy YA novels published by a minor business. You definitely haven't heard of any of them. TLDR, dude brings his newbie YA author girlfriend into a Vampire the Masquerade 5th edition game. She tries to make a maxed out Mary Sue character with 10 personalities, wants to have major NPCs worship her, and tweak plots just to make them her own, and refuses to listen when corrected. She even has a wonderful, biased boyfriend that plans to derail the campaign by backstabbing the group and goes on a guilt-tripping rampage when told off at the end of the road. GM ends up calling quits on the group. Main character syndrome strikes once again. This is definitely an example of that. being a selfish role player is something that a lot of people need to work on, because when you are naturally charismatic, it's easy to accidentally trump the group. However, this lady is clearly just someone who doesn't care. It's not that she's just very charismatic and wants to interact with the group and roleplay in the game. It's more that she just doesn't care about what the other players want. She just cares about her story. Main character syndrome. Her character is the main character, and that's all that matters. As long as he gets what he wants, the story is good. Doesn't matter if it treads in the face of whatever anyone else wants for their characters. It's always important to remember that Dungeons & Dragons is a group game, a game played with a party. It's not meant for one person to take over the story for the duration of the campaign. It's not any fun. And also, yeah, guilt tripping, it sucks. It's very manipulative. In short, don't do that. Alright, if you guys enjoyed this episode of RPG Horror Stories and you want to let me know, then please do leave a like. If you want to see more content from Crispy's Tavern, then please do hit subscribe. And finally, if you want to leave your own stories or thoughts, go down to the comments down below. In essence, like, comment, subscribe. I will see you all next time. Farewell.